for every woman who ever fell for the darkness that promised to keep her safe. Boston does not sleep quietly. It breathes in cigarette smoke and old money, in the salt off the harbor and the copper tang of ambition. It is a city that wears its history like a scar, proud of the wound, indifferent to the bleeding. And somewhere in the marrow of it, beneath the gleaming towers of the financial district and the cobblestoned dignity of Beacon Hill, there exists another city entirely, one with its own laws, its own courts, its own king. Most people never see that other city. They walk through it every day and see only the surface, the restaurants, the tailored men, the cars that cost more than their mortgages. They see it and they look away, because looking is dangerous, and human beings are nothing if not self-preserving. But Fiora Esposito had never learned to look away. It was, her father had always said, her finest quality and her most catastrophic flaw. She was 26 years old when everything changed. When the first note arrived, slipped beneath the door of her Boston penthouse on a Tuesday morning in October, written in a hand so precise it could have belonged to a surgeon or a killer. 3 words, printed in black ink on white cardstock. I see you. She was 26 when she met Nero Falcone, and 26 when she understood, for the first time in her life, that some men are not meant to be understood, only survived. The penthouse on Marlborough Street occupied the top 2 floors of a converted brownstone that had once belonged to a shipping magnate and now belonged, technically, to Senator Dante Esposito's real estate trust. Fiora lived in it alone. She preferred it that way. She'd been awake since 5, the way she always was, because sleep was something that happened to other people. People who didn't have quarterly reports to review, and a father whose political career perpetually teetered on the edge of some new catastrophe. She was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows in the kitchen, a mug of espresso in both hands, watching the early light crawl across the rooftops of Back Bay, when she heard it. A sound at the front door. Not a knock, something softer. A whisper of paper against marble. She set down her mug without looking away from the window for a long moment. There were no deliveries at 5:15 in the morning. Her building had a doorman, a concierge, and 2 security cameras in the lobby. Nothing arrived uninvited. She padded across the kitchen in bare feet, her silk robe brushing her ankles, and when she opened the door, there was nothing in the hallway but the faint scent of cigarette smoke, and the small white envelope on her welcome mat. No stamp, no return address. Her name wasn't written on it. Nothing was. Inside, on a card the size of a playing card, printed in neat block capitals, I see you. Fiora turned the card over. Blank. She looked up and down the hallway again, but there was only the hum of the building's heating system and the distant sound of a taxi on the street below. She went back inside, locked the door, and stood in her kitchen for a very long time, the card held between 2 fingers like something that might bite. She should have called the police. That was what a sensible person would have done. But Fiora Esposito was the daughter of a senator who had spent the last 3 years navigating allegations of financial impropriety. And the daughter of a senator learned early that the police were not always allies, that some problems were better handled quietly, internally, with the particular discretion that came with the right last name and the right checkbook. She called her father instead. Dante Esposito answered on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. She could hear the rustle of papers in the background, the particular acoustics of his study in the Beacon Hill townhouse where he lived with his second wife Margot and her 2 retrievers. Fiora. His voice was warm and tired in equal measure. It's early. Someone slid a note under my door. She read it to him. There was a silence on the other end of the line that lasted precisely long enough for her to understand that he already knew something, that he had been expecting something. Dad, come to the house tonight, he said. After 6. We'll discuss it then. We'll discuss it now, she said pleasantly. She'd inherited his stubbornness along with his dark hair and his talent for reading a room. Is this related to the Marchetti situation? Another pause. Come tonight, Fiora, please. She came at 7. The study smelled of pine and old books, and her father was standing at his desk when she arrived, still in his suit, the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes. He'd aged in the last year. The allegations had done that, and the scrutiny, and the particular cruelty of a city that builds its legends only to enjoy tearing them down. He poured her a scotch without asking, and poured one for himself, and they sat across from each other the way they always had, like two people playing chess on a board they'd both memorized. "There have been 3 other incidents," he said, "in the past month. Your car was followed twice on Commonwealth, and last week someone accessed the security footage from your building's external cameras. Why am I only hearing about this now? Because I hoped it would stop." He turned the glass in his hands. It hasn't. Fiora looked at him steadily. Her father was a handsome man, a politician's handsome, the kind that photographed well and aged into gravitas. But tonight he looked small in a way she had never seen before. "Who is it?" "We don't know yet." He set the glass down. "The FBI has been notified, but that takes time, and in the meantime, I want you to have protection. I have a security system. I want you to have a person," he said. "Someone close. I've already arranged it." "You've already—" She stopped, sat back. "When were you planning to ask me?" "I'm asking you now." "You said arranged." He had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. "His name is Nero Falcone. He has an excellent background in private security, former military. He comes," a slight hesitation, "highly recommended." "Recommended by whom?" "People I trust." Which told her nothing, which meant it was information he was choosing not to share. Fiora knew that particular inflection of her father's voice, the way she knew her own heartbeat. She'd been hearing it for 26 years. It meant, "I have decided. Please don't ask me to explain." She considered pushing. She considered her empty penthouse and the white card sitting on her kitchen counter, and the cold, flat certainty in those 3 words. "Fine," she said. "1 month, and he stays out of my way." Her father smiled at her, the warm, practiced smile of a man who had just gotten what he wanted. "He starts Monday." She drove home through the October dark, thinking about the way her father had said arranged, and the strange thing she'd seen in his face when he spoke the name. Not pride, exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something she would not identify then, because she was not yet in possession of the right information. She would be, soon enough. Monday arrived cold and gray, the harbor wind coming up off the water and rattling the windows in a way that made the penthouse feel less like a home and more like a ship at sea. Fiora had a 9 o'clock call with a foundation board, a lunch with her publicist, and a 4 o'clock meeting at the gallery downtown where 3 of her photographs were currently hanging. She was dressed by 7, black trousers, a cream silk blouse, her hair twisted back with the particular severity she used when she needed to feel armored, and she was on her second espresso and deep in her laptop when the concierge called up at 8:45. "Miss Esposito, there's a Mr. Falcone here for you." "Send him up," she said, and closed the laptop and waited. She heard the elevator, then footsteps in the hallway, unhurried even, the footsteps of a man who was comfortable moving quietly. Then the doorbell, and she crossed the room and opened the door, and her first thought was entirely involuntary and entirely unhelpful. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not average tall, the kind of tall that reorganized the space around a person, that made you recalibrate the geometry of a room. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the collar of his white shirt open at the throat, and he held himself with the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was more dangerous than motion. His face was... She caught herself. His face was irrelevant. He was her bodyguard, a professional, hired by her father. "Miss Esposito." His voice was low, unhurried, with an accent that lived somewhere between Boston and something older, Italian in the vowels, American in the consonants. Dark eyes, not brown exactly, darker than brown, the color of strong coffee or deep water. "I'm Nero Falcone." "I know who you are," she said. "Come in." He stepped inside, and his gaze did something she hadn't expected. It moved immediately, methodically, across the entire space, taking inventory without appearing to. The windows, the doors, the layout. He noted all of it without changing his expression, and she had the distinct impression that she was watching someone perform a function as naturally as breathing. "The building's security has some gaps," he said. "Good morning to you, too." The faintest thing crossed his face. Not quite a smile. "Good morning, Miss Esposito." "Fiora." She moved to the kitchen and refilled her espresso. We'll be spending a great deal of time together, apparently, so let's not be formal. Can I get you something? Coffee. Black. He was still standing, still doing his assessment, and she watched him from the kitchen, with the kind of attention she usually reserved for problems she was trying to solve. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a year or two more. The suit fit him the way suits only fit men who either paid for exceptional tailoring or who had bodies that made tailoring superfluous. A scar ran along the underside of his jaw, thin and silver, old enough to be fully healed. His hands, she noticed when he accepted the cup she offered, were not the hands of a desk worker. The knuckle of his right index finger had been broken and reset at a slight angle. "I've reviewed the incidents your father shared with me," he said. "The notes, the surveillance, the camera access. This isn't random." "I know. Whoever this is, they've been watching your patterns. Your morning coffee is at the window, visible from the rooftop of the building across the alley with the right equipment. You park in the same spot in the garage every day. You take the same route to your gallery." She stared at him over the rim of her cup. "You've already been watching me." 24 hours. He said it without apology. "Before taking a position, I need to understand the terrain." The word terrain landed oddly, with a weight that suggested something more practiced than ordinary security work. But she filed it away and said, "And what did your 24 hours tell you? That you're careful but not cautious. That you're used to being visible. That you believe your social position protects you." He paused. "It doesn't." "I didn't think it did. You behave as though you do." He said it without cruelty, which almost made it worse. It had the quality of an observed fact. "Starting today, we change your patterns. Variable routes. No predictable timing on the window. New parking arrangement. You want to restructure my life. I want to keep you alive." His eyes met hers directly, and there was nothing soft in them, nothing performative. Just a flat, clear certainty that she found, against her will, deeply reassuring. "That's what your father is paying me for." She set her cup down. "My father didn't tell me much about your background." "No." She waited for more. He offered nothing. "Military?" she prompted. "Among other things." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I have." A pause. "If you need my full curriculum vitae, your father can provide it. My job isn't to tell you my history. My job is to make sure you have one." Fiora regarded him for a long moment. There was something deliberately closed about him, a door that had been locked from the inside. She was a photographer by vocation, which meant she made her living reading what people didn't say, what their faces concealed and their bodies revealed. Nero Falcone's body revealed almost nothing. He had an extraordinary stillness, not emptiness, but control. The kind of control that came from years of discipline directed inward. It intrigued her against her better judgment. "All right," she said. "One condition. You're introduced as my assistant to anyone who asks. Not security, not a bodyguard." She picked up her laptop bag. "I have a 9 o'clock call. You can sit wherever you like that isn't in my eye line." He moved to a chair near the windows, which she noted, with some irritation, was exactly positioned to monitor both the entrance and her workspace, and said nothing more, and she took her call, and he sat with the stillness of something carved out of stone, and the morning continued, and Boston rattled its windows, and somewhere below them, the city breathed its old criminal breath. They fell into a rhythm over the following days, the way two people who dislike surrendering control always do, with friction, with silences, with the occasional moment of unexpected ease that made the friction that followed feel worse by comparison. Nero drove her. This was the first battle. Fiora had driven herself since she was 17. First, the modest Honda she'd insisted on over her father's objections, and then, later, the dark green Range Rover she now considered a close personal companion. She surrendered the keys with a grace she didn't feel, which was a skill she'd developed in her father's house and sharpened over a lifetime of watching men make decisions they framed as being for her benefit. He was a good driver, not showy, not aggressive. Smooth in a way that spoke of complete confidence in his own reflexes, taking corners cleanly, always positioned to exit a lane quickly if needed. She noticed, in the first week, that he never took the same route twice. that he varied the time of departure by as much as 40 minutes in either direction, that he watched mirrors obsessively. "You do that thing," she said one morning on their way to the gallery, "where you look at every car behind us as though it's a potential threat. Because it might be. You've been doing it for 6 days. Has anything actually threatened us?" "No." A pause. "That's what success looks like." She turned to look at his profile. He was watching the road with the kind of focus most people reserved for things that cost them something. "Have you ever actually been in a situation where—" She stopped, reformulated. "What's the worst thing that's happened to you in this line of work?" He was quiet for the length of a city block. Then, "A principal was shot, a diplomat, in Prague." "Did he survive?" "She." Fiora absorbed that. Did she survive? No. The word landed in the car like something heavy falling. She looked back at the road. "I'm sorry." "I'm not interested in your sympathy." He said it without heat. "I'm interested in not repeating the outcome. Pay attention to your surroundings today at the gallery opening. Note anyone who seems to be watching you specifically rather than the work." The opening was for a young painter named Felix Strand, 23 years old and spectacularly talented, whose abstract sold for figures that made her stomach tighten with something she recognized as admiration. The gallery on Newbury Street was full by 7. Boston's arts community, a handful of collectors, the usual media, a scatter of her father's political acquaintances who had learned to appear cultured when it served them. Nero stood near the entrance, not quite inside, not quite outside. He'd exchanged the suit for something slightly more casual, dark wool trousers, a black shirt open at the collar, and he looked like he could be any of a dozen men at any gallery in any city, handsome and unremarkable, except that he didn't look at the paintings. He looked at the people. She watched him watching. "You're photographing him." Felix appeared at her elbow, champagne in hand, his blonde hair falling artfully forward. He was Dutch, with the particular confidence of someone who had learned early that his talent was real. He nodded toward Nero. "That man by the door." "I don't have my camera." "Your eyes are doing it." Felix smiled. "He's worth a picture. Very strong face. Very shut. He works for me." "He doesn't look like he works for anyone." She glanced back toward the door. Nero had turned slightly, tracking someone new who'd entered. His expression had shifted, not dramatically, barely perceptibly, but she was watching closely enough to catch it. A tightening around the eyes. Recognition, maybe, or something adjacent to it. "Who's that?" she asked Felix. He followed her gaze. Not sure. Someone's +1. He came with Armand Vauclair." Vauclair was a French restaurateur who operated 3 establishments in Boston, and whose money, her father had once mentioned, with the careful neutrality of a man choosing his words, came from sources beyond the restaurant industry. She looked at the newcomer, a compact man in a suit that was expensive but not tasteful, with a jaw like a shovel and eyes that moved through the room in the same way Nero's did, but less elegantly. When she looked back at Nero, he had already looked away. Whatever she'd seen in his face was gone. He caught her gaze across the room and held it for exactly 1 second, and in that second, something passed between them that she couldn't name but filed immediately under things to think about later. She circulated. She spoke to Felix and to collectors and to the journalist from the Globe who wanted her comment on her father's upcoming re-election campaign, to which she gave the pleasant, practiced non-answer she'd perfected at 16. And all the while she was aware, with the peculiar accuracy of new attention, of Nero's position in the room, of the way the air seemed to organize itself slightly differently around him, of the way people moved without knowing why, giving him a slightly wider berth than they gave anyone else. In the car afterward, she said, "The man who came in with Vauclair." A beat. "What about him? You know him?" The pause was very brief. "I've seen faces like his before." "That's not the same as not knowing him." He drove. The city slid past in wet light, October rain beginning to come down soft and cold. "There are people who operate in certain circles in this city," he said, finally. "I make it my business to know what they look like. That's all." "What circles?" "The kind your father's enemies move in." He said it smoothly, and it wasn't entirely false, and it wasn't entirely true, and she heard the seam between those two things as clearly as she heard the rain, but she let it lie, for now. She let it lie, and she watched the rain, and she thought about the way his jaw had tightened for one fraction of a second at the sight of that man's face, and she thought, there is a story here I don't have all the pages of yet. The second note arrived on a Wednesday. This time it was in the lobby, left with the concierge by a courier who had disappeared before anyone thought to ask his company. The envelope was addressed to her in the same block capitals. Inside, a photograph. Not her. Her father, taken through a long lens on the steps of the State House last Thursday, and printed across the bottom in the same precise hand. Does he know what he owes? She showed it to Nero without speaking. She watched his face while he read it, the photograph, the words. That stillness of his intensified. A muscle moved in his jaw. Your father has enemies related to a business matter, he said. The Marchetti situation. She stared. I mentioned that name once, weeks ago, on the phone with my father. I researched comprehensively, he said, and handed the photograph back. What do you know about the Marchetti situation? Enough to understand why someone might be doing this. That's not enough for me. He looked at her for a moment. His eyes, in the afternoon light from the penthouse windows, were the precise color of a winter lake, dark and still, and with something moving far beneath the surface. Your father borrowed from people who were not forgiving creditors, he said. When his development deal in the seaport fell through 3 years ago, the private financing he'd arranged, it didn't come from a fund. It came from a family. A family. She understood the word in its second meaning, the Marchetti family. There are various families in this city. The Marchettis were one. They've been paid back in full, legally. But there's a faction that believes the debt included certain introductions, political access. Your father didn't deliver on that understanding. How do you know any of this? Because I grew up on the edges of these worlds, he said, and the past tense was very carefully placed, and she noted it, and he moved on before she could press it. I'm going to reach out to some contacts. We may be able to identify who specifically is behind the notes. In the meantime, I'd like you to stay above the 10th floor in this building when you're home. The windows below that line are accessible from certain positions on the adjacent rooftop. She sat down. It felt, suddenly, like a situation with walls. You're telling me that my father borrowed money from the mob, and now I'm being stalked because he didn't hold up his end? I'm telling you the notes reference a debt. Whether this is actually connected to the Marchettis or someone using their name for leverage, that I don't know yet. He paused. But I'm going to find out. There was no drama in how he said it, no performance. Just the flat certainty of a man making a statement about something he was fully capable of doing, and the combination of that certainty and what he'd just told her, and the way the light fell on his face in that moment, made her feel something she rigorously refused to examine. I want to know everything you find out, she said. Not a sanitized version. Everything. That depends on what I find. It doesn't depend on anything. I'm not a child, and I'm not a client of my father's. I am a grown woman with a stalker, and the right to full information about my own situation. He considered her with an expression that was not quite respect, but was in the neighborhood of it. All right, he said. Everything. The days that followed had a particular texture, close and watchful and alive in a way she couldn't entirely attribute to the danger. She was used to living alone, to the penthouse's high-ceilinged solitude, to the long mornings with her coffee and her camera and the light on Boston's rooftops. Having Nero in it changed the air quality. He was unobtrusive by any objective standard. He didn't invade her spaces, didn't make demands on her attention, disappeared into whatever corner was tactically ideal, and existed there with the silence of something trained to be invisible. But she knew where he was at every moment. Some animal part of her tracked him the way a person tracks a fire. Not afraid of it exactly, but aware. Aware of the warmth, the potential for destruction. She was developing a new series for a March show, landscapes, long exposures of the harbor at night, the light bleeding in the water. On Friday evening, she was working in the study with her developing trays, and she looked up at some point to find him standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression that surprised her so completely she knocked a photograph off the drying line. He crossed the room in 2 strides and caught it before it hit the floor. He looked at it. A harbor shot, the lights of East Boston blurred into long gold ribbons across the black water, a single boat in the distance, perfectly still. "This is good," he said. She was not used to that from him. "You know photography?" "I know what I respond to." He handed it back carefully. "This makes me feel the cold." She took the photograph and looked at it, and then looked at him. There was something briefly open in his face, something she hadn't seen before, a small gap in the armor, and she understood with sudden clarity that he was not naturally closed, that it was a learned thing, that whatever lay behind that stillness had been carefully, deliberately covered. She wanted to uncover it. The thought arrived with the same certainty she felt in her best work, the recognition of something worth looking at. "Where did you grow up?" she asked. The gap in his face closed. "The North End," he said, and left the doorway. The North End smelled like bread and history and the particular salt of old Atlantic cities. The Italian neighborhood that had existed in Boston for more than a century, a dense maze of narrow streets and brick apartment buildings, and restaurants whose owners had known each other's parents and their parents before them. Fiora had grown up in Beacon Hill, wealth's neighborhood, old and assured, and the North End had always been the place her father's friends went for dinner, for Sunday gravy, for the feasts of St. Anthony in August, when the streets filled with music and paper lanterns and the smell of fried dough. She had loved it without ever belonging to it. She went there on a Saturday morning with Nero 2 steps behind her, ostensibly to visit a ceramics exhibition at a small gallery on Hanover Street, genuinely because she wanted to see what happened to his face when they crossed into that neighborhood. Something did happen. It was subtle. The set of his shoulders shifted slightly, the way a man's does when he returns to somewhere that shaped him. His eyes moved differently here, recognizing rather than assessing, though the assessment never stopped. He knew the streets. She could see it in the way he moved through them, automatically taking the wider sidewalk, navigating a corner without checking the street sign. "You grew up on this block?" she asked when they turned onto a side street she didn't know. "Near it." He glanced at a building, brick, 4 stories, green shutters, and looked away quickly. Too quickly. "That building?" "Keep walking, Fiora." "Was that your building?" "There's a coffee shop 2 streets over that does the best almond cornetti in the city. I recommend it." She looked at the building a moment longer, the green shutters, a small Madonna in a niche above the second-floor window, and then followed him, because she understood instinctively that this was a thing she should approach sideways rather than directly. The way you approached certain kinds of light with a camera, by not looking at it head-on, by catching its effect instead. The coffee shop was everything he'd promised. A narrow room with marble counters and a proprietress of approximately 80 who greeted Nero with the warmth of a woman who had fed someone since childhood. He said something to her in Italian, low and quick, and the woman glanced at Fiora with an assessing look that was followed almost immediately by an approving one. "She's too pretty for you," the woman said in English, for Fiora's benefit, and went to pull their coffees. Fiora sat at the small window table. "She knows you well." "She knew my mother." He said it without inflection. "She died when I was 14. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked out the window at the narrow street, the morning light thin and gold on the brick. "She was a good woman. She worked very hard." "And your father?" The silence that followed had a different quality than his usual silences, more weight in it, more history. "My father," he said finally, "is a complicated subject. Most fathers are. Some more than others." He looked at her then. His dark eyes were very direct, and there was something in them that wasn't quite a warning and wasn't quite an invitation. Something that occupied the uncertain territory between. "There are things I can't tell you, Fiora, not because I don't trust you, because knowing them would change your situation, and I'm not ready for it to change." She held his gaze. "What does that mean?" "It means some information creates obligations. And until I've done what I came here to do, I need you to let certain things alone." "That's very cryptic." "Yes. And you expect me to simply accept that?" "I expect you to accept that I'm doing everything in my power to keep you safe, and that the details of why I'm particularly motivated to do that are complex." He picked up his coffee. "Enjoy the cornetti." She did enjoy the cornetti because it was perfect. and she sat in the window of that small cafe in the North End and watched his profile in the morning light and thought about what he wasn't telling her, and the particular shape of the things people don't say, how they reveal more than what is said, if you know how to look at them. Her phone rang on the walk back to the car. Her father, from a Washington number. "There's been a development," Dante said. "The FBI is tracking a man named Sal Renetti. He's been connected to 2 other intimidation campaigns, both against political figures, both ultimately contracted by the Gennaro family." The Gennaro family? She glanced at Nero's back ahead of her. Not the Marchettis. The Marchettis work with the Gennaros. There's a hierarchy. "I understand hierarchies, Dad." She lowered her voice. "Who is this family?" They run a significant portion of the Northeast. Old money, old structure. The head of the family is a man named Enzo Falcone. The name stopped her mid-step. "Fiora, are you there?" "I'm here." She looked at Nero, 5 steps ahead of her, who had stopped as well and turned back, reading something in her face or her stillness. "Yes, I'm here. I'll call you back." She hung up. Nero's eyes were on her face, and she thought of what he'd said 3 days ago. "There are things I can't tell you, not because I don't trust you." "Enzo Falcone," she said quietly. Something moved across his face, tectonic, gone in an instant. "Fiora, tell me," she said. "Right now, tell me." He didn't tell her in the street. He told her in the car, with the engine running and the heat on and Boston moving past the windows, the slow Saturday morning traffic, the joggers on the esplanade visible in the distance, the ordinary life of a city that had no idea what was being said in a dark green Range Rover parked on Hanover Street. "Enzo Falcone," he said, his hands on the steering wheel, not moving, "is my father." She had known it was coming, and it still arrived like cold water. She sat with it for a moment, the word father rearranging everything, the particular geometry of what she'd thought she understood shifting. "Illegitimate," he said. "My mother she worked for his family. Not for him directly, but they were together, briefly, when she was young. She left when she found out what he was, raised me alone. She never wanted me to know him, and I didn't. Not until I was 20, and she was gone, and he found me." His voice remained level throughout this, the way a man's voice is level when he has said something many times in his own head until it became rehearsed. "He wanted me to come into the organization. I didn't. But you know it," she said. "You know how it works." "Yes. And the person behind these notes is not my father." He turned to look at her. "I want you to understand that clearly. My father has no reason to threaten yours. Their business dealings were resolved, as your father told me. This is someone using the family name or structure for leverage, likely one of the Gennaro faction, which has been in conflict with the Falcones for 2 years over territory in the seaport. Your father's political contacts are useful to both sides. Someone believes he owes a debt that predates the financial resolution." She absorbed this. "And my father hired you knowing who you are." "Your father hired me because of who my father is," he said it simply. "Because someone with a direct line into the Falcone structure is the most effective possible deterrent. If whoever is behind this knows that Enzo Falcone's son is protecting you, it complicates their position. Yes. My father is using you as leverage." A pause. "I agreed to it." "Why?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. The heat hummed. A couple walked by on the sidewalk, arm in arm, their breath visible in the cold. "Because you're not your father's political chess piece," he said. "You're a person who has nothing to do with any of this, and you're in danger because of decisions made by men, and I find that—" Another pause, during which he seemed to be deciding how honest to be. "Unacceptable." Fiora looked at him for a long time, at the clean line of his jaw, the broken knuckle, the controlled, careful hands on the steering wheel. "How long have you known about the Gennaro connection, that they're behind the notes?" "Suspected since the first week. Confirmed this morning, before you called your father. I have a contact, someone inside the Gennaro structure, someone who owes my father a favor that by extension they owe me. You were going to tell me. Today. And your father, Enzo Falcone, Does he know about you being here? About me? Something very careful entered his eyes. He knows I'm working a private security job. He doesn't know for whom. A beat. I'd prefer to keep it that way for now. Because if he knew it was Senator Esposito's daughter... Because if he knew, Nero said, very quietly, he would insert himself. And that would complicate things in ways I'm not prepared to manage yet. He started the engine. Are you angry? She considered the question seriously. She was something, but she wasn't entirely certain anger was the right name for it. She was reconfiguring, rearranging the pieces of the last 2 weeks into a new shape that accommodated this information. She was aware that she had been lied to, by omission, which was different from being lied to, but only by degree. She was aware that the man next to her was the illegitimate son of a Mafia patriarch and had been planted in her life by her father for reasons that were not entirely about her safety. She was also aware that none of this changed the way he'd caught that photograph before it hit the floor. Not angry, she said. But we're doing this differently from now on. No more managed information. If you find something, I hear it the same day. Agreed. And your father, if that becomes relevant, I hear it before it becomes a crisis. He looked at her. Agreed. She nodded once, and he pulled into traffic, and the city moved around them, and she sat in the passenger seat of her own car, being driven through her own neighborhood by a man whose father ran the criminal architecture of the Northeast, and she thought, this is either the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me, or the most interesting, and she was not entirely sure which would prove worse. The October Gala at the Fairmont was her father's event, an annual fundraiser for his foundation, the Esposito Legacy Initiative, which did genuine good work in education, and which also served as the most convenient gathering of Boston's political and financial class that the calendar offered. 300 guests, a string quartet, and more money per table than most families in the city saw in a year. Fiora wore black, floor-length velvet, off the shoulder, her hair down for the first time since this began, falling in dark waves to her shoulder blades. She stood in the penthouse bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror and felt something settle in her chest. A decision. She was not going to allow this threat, whoever it was, whatever they wanted, to reduce her. She was going to walk into that room and be exactly who she was and look exactly how she chose to look and refuse, flatly, to be smaller than the situation. She came out of the bedroom to find Nero in the living room, and she watched his face as she walked toward him. He didn't look away. His expression didn't change in the ways that expressions usually change when a man is presented with something that strikes him. No smile, no appreciative look, none of the expected social performance. What happened instead was a quality of attention that intensified, that focused, that did something to the air between them. I'll need to stay close tonight, he said. There will be people at that event who know who I am, or who know who my father is. If any of them are connected to the Gennaro side, your presence with me may accelerate things. Accelerate them how? They may move sooner rather than later. He held her coat for her, a gesture so natural it almost hurt to think about. Which is fine. I'd rather have them move on my schedule than theirs. That's a very particular use of the word fine. I'll protect you. He said it looking directly at her. That is not a thing I say lightly. The Fairmont ballroom was gilded and warm, 400 candles and the particular smell of winter flowers and expensive perfume, the kind of room that told you at first glance exactly how the world was organized. Her father found her within 5 minutes, senator's handshake, senator's smile, his eyes moving briefly to Nero with an expression she now had a name for. Gratitude, primarily, and underneath it, guilt. You told him, he said quietly, drawing her slightly aside. He told me, she corrected. Don't do that again. Don't manage information about my own life. Her father looked at her with the expression he'd worn when she was 12 and corrected his pronunciation of an Italian phrase in front of his colleagues. Embarrassment dressed as amusement. No, he said. You're right. I'm sorry, Fioretta. The Italian diminutive undid her, the way it always did. She touched his hand briefly. We're all right, she said. Just don't do it again. She circulated. It was expected of her, and she was good at it. The conversation, the listening, the gentle deflection of political questions, the warm navigation of her father's world. She was aware of Nero moving at her periphery, always positioned correctly, always watching. And she was aware, too, of a particular man she spotted at 9:30 near the bar, speaking to the French restaurateur Vauclair. The same compact man from the gallery, the shovel jaw, the moving eyes. She did not look at Nero. She waited until she was at the bar herself, accepting a glass of champagne from the bartender, before she turned slightly and said under her breath, "He's here." "I see him." Nero's voice from directly behind her left shoulder, close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence. "Don't look at him again." "Who is he?" "Marco Gennaro, the youngest son. Not the decision-maker, but close enough to one." "He's watching me." "Yes." "He's been watching me since we walked in." A slight pause. "I know." She heard something in his voice that she filed away carefully, something that was not professional, something that lived outside the parameters of a job. "Nero," she kept her voice very low. "Don't turn around," he said. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "When have I given you any other kind?" "Fair." She took a sip of champagne and looked at the middle distance, the room, the glittering collected wealth of Boston. "Is there something personal in how you feel about people watching me?" The pause was short. "Yes," he said. She exhaled slowly. "We'll discuss that later." "We will," he agreed. Marco Gennaro left at 10. Nero tracked him to the door with his eyes, and then made 2 calls in succession on his cell in the hallway, brief and low-voiced. And when he returned, his face had a new quality to it. Resolved, decided. The face of a man who has identified the next step and is prepared to take it. "He was there to see your face," Nero told her in the car home. "To confirm you're real. The campaign against your father has been about the debt, but Marco has taken an interest in you specifically. That changes the nature of the threat." She felt the cold enter the car, despite the heater. "Changes how?" "It's no longer purely political." He said it without looking at her. "He finds you. He's noticed you." The word noticed arrived with a weight that made her understand it meant something more than interest in her as a political asset. "Ah," she said. "I won't let that develop into anything," he said, and there was nothing professional in his voice at all now, just the flat, certain sound of a decision already made. "I need you to trust me on that." She looked at his profile in the passing lights of the expressway, the scar on his jaw, the hands on the wheel, the man who was the illegitimate son of a man he'd chosen not to become, trying to outrun the gravity of his own history. "I trust you," she said, and discovered it was true. She woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of her phone. Not a call, a text, from an unknown number. One image, a photograph of her in the Fairmont ballroom, taken from close range, her black velvet back to the camera, Nero, a dark shape behind her. And beneath it, "He can't protect you from what's already inside." She sat up in bed and held the phone and felt the cold of the thing move through her. Then she got up, crossed the hallway in bare feet, and knocked on Nero's door. The second bedroom, which he used as a command post as much as a bedroom, the desk covered in papers and his laptop open. He opened it almost immediately. He'd been awake. He was still dressed, dark trousers, the black shirt, barefoot. Something about the feet made him briefly human in a way the suit didn't. She held up the phone. He read it. He looked at her face. "Come inside," he said. She sat on the edge of the desk while he pulled up something on his laptop. His focus was absolute. She watched his hands on the keyboard, efficient and quick. He'd taken the phone and was running something on it, some trace or analysis she didn't have the technical vocabulary to name. "They're inside my building," she said. "Or they were tonight." The photo was taken at the Fairmont. He didn't look up from the screen. "But the number, it bounced off a cell tower 2 blocks from here. So they followed us home. Or they were already here." He looked up then, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen from him before. The professional control was still there, but beneath it something colder, more animal, had risen to the surface. "I'm going to make a call," he said. "I'm going to ask for something I haven't asked for yet, and it's going to mean involving my father's world more directly. I want your consent before I do it." She studied his face. What are you asking for? Falcone eyes on your building. On the street. A perimeter. He paused. My father's men. The words sat between them. She understood what it meant, what it cost him, to go back to that, to use what he'd walked away from. Will it keep me safe? She said. Yes. Then do it. He made the call in Italian, stepping partially away, but she heard enough to understand the shape of it. The deference in his voice, the particular quality of speaking to someone who holds authority you haven't fully surrendered. He was asking, not ordering. She heard his father's name spoken once, and heard a pause in the conversation during which someone on the other end said something that made Nero's jaw tighten. He ended the call and turned back. It's arranged. What did he say to you? In the middle. A hesitation. He asked if you were important to me. She waited. And? I said yes. Nero's voice was very even. He met her eyes directly. He'll want to meet you at some point. I've asked for time. She was standing very close to him now, she realized, had moved without noticing, the way you move toward heat. Nero. She said his name with a care she hadn't used before, as though it were an object that could be damaged. I need to tell you something. Fiora, I've been photographing you, she said, without your knowledge, for the last week, on my phone, when you weren't looking. I needed to see you the way I see my subjects, because I couldn't understand you any other way. She paused. I thought you should know. He was very still. Show me. She unlocked her phone, the real phone, not the one he was still holding, and handed it to him. He scrolled. She watched his face as he moved through the images, himself at the window, reading. In the kitchen, coffee cup in hand, the morning light at an angle that made the scar on his jaw look like a brushstroke. Standing in the doorway of the study, looking at her developing work. He stopped on that last one, looked at it for a long time. I look, he started, like someone who is very used to watching and not being watched, she said. Like someone who has spent a long time not being seen. He handed the phone back slowly. The space between them had collapsed, she realized, at some point in the last 2 minutes. They were close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, could see the way his pulse moved in his throat. This is not something I should be, he said, and stopped. No, she agreed. You are a principal. You're under threat. I am here to, I know what you're here for. Then you know that this, he gestured between them, a minimal gesture, almost helpless, is not something I can pursue. You're not pursuing it, she said. It's pursuing us. She stepped back, giving them both the gift of distance. Go to bed, Nero. We'll figure out the rest in daylight. She went back to her room and did not sleep again until almost 4, and lay in the dark thinking about the way he'd scrolled through those photographs with the care of a man reading something important, the way he'd looked at the last one, the word seen sitting in the space between them like a lit match. The building changed the next morning. It wasn't visible to the untrained eye, nothing as obvious as men standing at the door in suits. It was subtler, a car she didn't recognize occupying the spot across the street with a patience that suggested it was permanent. A delivery driver who spent 15 minutes talking to the concierge and left without delivering anything. 2 men in the coffee shop on the corner who occupied a table near the window without ordering for over an hour. Nero's world, moving into hers. She found herself unable to stay inside. The penthouse, which she loved for its light and its altitude and the way it removed her from the street-level noise of the city, felt contracted. She put on her coat and her camera and told Nero she was going to the harbor, and he didn't argue, just put on his jacket and followed. It was cold, November arriving early this year, and the harbor had gone the color of gunmetal, the water heavy and restless. She walked the waterfront path and shot the light, the flat gray brightness of an overcast October sky, the way it turned the harbor into a mirror for the clouds. She was not thinking about photographs. She was thinking about her father's debt, and Marco Gennaro's eyes, and the man walking 5 feet behind her with the winter sky in his face. Tell me about your mother, she said, without turning around. He caught up to her. They walked side by side, which was less secure than his usual position, but he permitted it. Lucia, he said. She was born in the North End. Her family had a bakery on Salem Street. It's gone now, a wine bar. She had a quality of paying complete attention. When she looked at you, you felt like the only thing in her sight. He paused. She would have been difficult for Enzo Falcone to resist. And him? What did she say about him? She said he was beautiful and dangerous, and that those two qualities tend to come packaged together. A slight thing moved across his face. She wasn't wrong. Fiora looked at him. She's describing you. She wasn't describing me. Isn't she? She stopped walking. The harbor moved in front of them, restless and gray and very large. Beautiful and dangerous, packaged together. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in him, the professional discipline and the person underneath it, and the thing that had been building since she'd shown him those photographs at 2 a.m. "Don't," he said, but it was gentle, the don't of a man asking rather than refusing. "I'm not doing anything," she said. "I'm taking a walk." She raised her camera and took a picture of the water. "Tell me about your father. What happened when he found you?" He was quiet for a moment, and she thought he might retreat again, but instead he put his hands in his coat pockets and said, "I was 20. I'd just come back from 2 years in the army. I'd enlisted at 18 because it was either that or the street, and I'd made a choice my mother would have approved of. And I was working a security job at a hotel downtown, the Marriott on Long Wharf, and one evening a man came in and sat in the lobby and waited for my shift to end, and then introduced himself as my father." "What did you feel?" "Nothing at first, then rage, then," he exhaled, "curiosity, which was the dangerous part." He watched the water. "He's a compelling man, Enzo. He has a kind of gravity. You understand very quickly why people follow him, why the structure holds together around him. He wanted me in it. He saw something of himself in me, and I think he felt something like guilt about my mother, and I was the way to resolve it." He paused. "I worked for him for 18 months. I learned the whole structure, the finances, the connections, the security apparatus. And then I walked away. Why? Because I met a man whose hands were cut off for skimming $4,000. His voice was perfectly level, and I understood that I could not spend my life in a structure where that was acceptable." He looked at her. "My father respected it, the walking away. He said it was what he would have done if he'd been stronger." A pause. "I don't know if I believe him." She lowered her camera. The story had the quality of something very carefully preserved, held against the cold in the same way the city held its history, present, under the surface, accessible if you knew where to look. "Do you love him?" she asked. The question surprised him. She could see it. "I don't know," he said. "I know I understand him. I know what we share." He glanced at her. "I know it doesn't disqualify me from choosing differently than he did." She nodded slowly. They stood in the cold and watched the water, and the city moved behind them, and eventually she raised her camera and took a photograph of the two of them reflected in a puddle of harbor water, her and the dark shape of him behind her, blurred and gray and very close. Her phone rang. It was her father, and his voice was strange, tight. "There's been a change," he said. "Marco Gennaro has made contact. He wants a meeting. He says he has information about who hired him and why, and he wants to negotiate." She relayed this to Nero, with her eyes on his face as she listened to her father speak. She watched him process it, the stillness, the rapid internal calculation she could see moving in his eyes like weather. "Tell your father yes," he said. "Tell him to agree to the meeting." His voice had changed. It was the voice of someone stepping deliberately back into something they had stepped out of. "Tell him I'll arrange the terms." The location Nero chose was a restaurant in the South End, a place called Antico, small and Italian and excellent, owned by a man named Tomas Rinaldi, who had the kind of relationship with Nero that existed in the spaces between words. They arrived an hour before Marco Gennaro was expected, and Nero spent that hour in conversation with Rinaldi that produced 3 men who positioned themselves at the bar and the door with the practiced casualness of people who had done this before. Fiora sat across from Nero at a corner table and felt the room differently than she had felt rooms before, with the particular heightened attention of someone who understands they are in the operational version of something rather than the social version. "You don't have to be here," he said. "I'm the reason for the meeting." "You're the subject of the meeting." That's different. I want to see him, she said. I want to see the face of the person who's been sending those notes. I want to look him in the eyes. Something moved in Nero's face. Why? Because that's how I stop being afraid, she said. Not by not seeing, by seeing completely. He looked at her for a moment, the full weight of his attention, which she was learning was a significant thing, and then nodded once. Marco Gennaro arrived at 8 with one man. A courtesy, Nero explained, a signal that this was intended as a genuine negotiation rather than a provocation. He was smaller than she'd expected, now that she was close to him, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a mouth that curved easily into a smile that didn't reach them. He was perhaps 40, well-dressed, with the particular grooming of a man who spends money on his appearance because appearance is currency. He saw Fiora, and his face shifted in a way that confirmed what Nero had told her, an appreciation that was more personal than professional, that had specific rather than general quality. She held his gaze steadily. Miss Esposito, he said, settling into the chair across from them. You are more beautiful than your photographs. You've been taking a lot of those, she said, a small smile. A precaution. He looked at Nero, and something else moved in his face then. Something careful, something that recalibrated. Falcone. Gennaro. Nero's voice had none of its usual texture. It was flat, almost businesslike, the voice of a man in a meeting. I didn't know you were involved, Marco said. That changes certain calculations. That was the intention. Nero leaned back in his chair. The notes stop. The surveillance stops. Whatever arrangement you believe Senator Esposito failed to honor, it goes through a different channel. Political access is not a currency he can legally trade, and pressing that debt through intimidation of his daughter is not a strategy that ends well for anyone. Marco looked at him steadily. Your father knows you're doing this. My father has his own views. His own views include not wanting conflict with us over, a glance at Fiora, a civilian. I'm gratified that we agree, Nero said. The senator's debt is real. It's being renegotiated through legitimate channels, Nero said. A political consulting arrangement. His office has been approached. This is a cleaner resolution than the alternative. Marco was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to Fiora again with that personal quality she'd identified, and she didn't flinch from it. You have a very interesting protector, he said to her. He's adequate, she said, and Marco surprised her by laughing, a brief, genuine sound that transformed his face briefly into something almost likable. She's extraordinary, he said to Nero. I see why. Nero's expression didn't change, but something in his body did, a quality of attention narrowing to a point. The campaign ends, he said. Tonight. Tonight, Marco agreed and stood. A pleasure, Miss Esposito. I'm sorry for the alarm. He glanced once more at Nero. Your father will hear this went cleanly. He left. The men at the bar relaxed fractionally. Rinaldi appeared from the kitchen with a bottle of wine he poured without being asked, and disappeared again. Fiora looked at Nero across the table. He was still watching the door through which Marco had left, and she could see the decompression happening in him, the held tension releasing, muscle by muscle. Is it over? She said. The threat from that direction, yes. He picked up his wineglass. Whether there's residual risk from others in that faction, I'll know within 48 hours. He drank. You were very calm. I was terrified, she said. But I've learned that terror and calm are not mutually exclusive. He set the glass down and looked at her across the table, and the restaurant moved around them, the other diners, the quiet music, the particular warmth of a room in which good food was being cooked and people were safe, and she felt, very clearly, the specific quality of the moment, its pivot nature, what it was before and what it would become after. I said yes, she said, when your father asked if you were important to me. What did you say exactly? He paused. I said you were important. To you. Yes. His eyes were very direct. To me. And when is it that we get to talk about that? She said. The professional circumstances, the threat, they're resolving. When does the other conversation start? Fiora. Her name in his mouth had a quality she'd been cataloging for weeks, the specific way he said it, as though it were something he held carefully. "I know the timing is complicated," she said. "I know your world is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons this doesn't—" She stopped. "But I've been taking pictures of you for a week, Nero, and I can't make myself stop, and that means something." It always means something. He looked at her across the white tablecloth, with the candlelight between them and his wine untouched, and the restaurant moving around them like it didn't matter. "Not yet," he said. "A few more days. Let me close the professional piece completely. Then—" A pause, during which she saw something real, unguarded, briefly visible. "Then yes." She nodded. She could wait a few more days. She had been waiting, after all, without knowing what she was waiting for considerably longer than that. The call came on a Thursday morning, and Nero took it in the hallway while she had her breakfast, and she could hear from the cadence, from the long silences on his end during which he listened, that this was not a call he had wanted to receive. He came back into the kitchen and said, "My father wants to meet you." She set down her coffee. "You said you'd bought time." "The 48 hours I requested became 24. He said it without self-pity. He has connections in the Gennaro structure. Marco told someone. It reached him. A pause. "I can refuse. I want to be clear that I can refuse this. But it would cost you something. Several things." She looked at him. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, and the morning light was on him, and he looked like a man who had been asked to choose between two things he valued, and was still determining which was which. "I'll meet him," she said. "Fiora, he's your father. He's part of your history and your situation, and if we're—" She stopped briefly. "If I'm going to understand your life, then I need to understand where you come from." She picked up her coffee. "Set the meeting." They drove to the north end that afternoon, not to the small apartment building with the green shutters, but to a different address. A building on Commercial Street with a view of the harbor, unremarkable on the outside, quietly extraordinary within. Nero knew the doorman, knew the elevator operator. They went to the 5th floor, and Nero knocked twice on a door at the end of the corridor, and the door opened. Enzo Falcone was in his 60s, with the kind of face that had been handsome in his youth and had become commanding with age. He was broad-shouldered and wore his weight like a man comfortable with himself, his dark hair now almost entirely silver. He wore a suit without a tie and had Nero's eyes, that same deep, still color, but without the guardedness. Enzo Falcone's eyes were entirely open because he had nothing to hide from. He looked at Fiora for a moment with an assessment that was thorough and unashamed, and then looked at his son, and the thing between them was complicated enough to fill the room. "The senator's daughter," Enzo said. His accent was more Italian than Nero's, the cadences of another generation. "Come in." The apartment was, she almost laughed, beautiful. Books on every wall, photographs in silver frames, a window that looked out on the harbor with the kind of view that cost money everywhere and in the North End cost history. On the coffee table, a chess set, mid-game. "Do you play?" Enzo asked her, following her eyes. "My father taught me." Nero refuses. He settled into an armchair with the ease of a king. "Sit, please." She sat. Nero remained standing. She noted the position. He had placed himself, without appearing to, between her and the door. The old habit of protection now applied to two people simultaneously. "You've been managing a situation," Enzo said to Nero, in a tone that was not accusatory but had edges, "without consulting me." "I managed it successfully." "Using the Falcone name as a deterrent." "It worked." "It always works," Enzo said dryly. He turned his attention back to Fiora. "My son doesn't tell me things. He never has. His mother raised him to keep his own counsel." A pause. "She was a remarkable woman." "He's told me about her," Fiora said carefully. Something moved in Enzo's face, a brief, genuine expression, gone quickly. "He told you about her." He seemed to find that significant. "He doesn't tell anyone about her." He looked at Nero. "She matters to you," he said, and it was not a question. Nero said nothing, which was, she'd learned, its own kind of answer. "The Gennaro situation," Enzo said, returning to business with the efficiency of a man who had learned to keep emotion in its designated lane. "Marco's people have stood down. There's a new arrangement with the senator's office that will satisfy the outstanding obligation. It's clean. He looked at Fiora. Your father is safe. You are safe. The threat is resolved. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me. Thank my son. He leaned forward slightly. I'll be honest with you, Miss Esposito, because I find dishonesty tedious. You are the first person my son has brought to me. In 36 years of knowing he existed, and 6 years of knowing him, he has never once introduced me to someone who mattered to him. I notice things. He glanced at Nero. You notice that I notice. Nero's jaw was tight. I'm not going to give you advice, Enzo said to his son. You've never taken it. But I will say, he paused, with the particular timing of a man who had spent decades commanding attention. She is worth the complications. He stood. Stay for dinner. Nero looked at Fiora. She surprised them both by saying, We'd like that. They stayed. The dinner was the kind that came from a kitchen staffed by a woman named Carmela, who had apparently been cooking for the Falcone household for 30 years, who took one look at Fiora and proclaimed her too thin, and immediately began setting additional courses. They ate around a long table. Enzo, Nero, Fiora, and 2 other men who were introduced with first names only and who spoke little and ate with the particular focused appreciation of people who knew good food. And at the table, something shifted. She watched Nero in his father's presence. The guardedness, yes, but also something beneath it. A young man who had wanted a father and been given a complicated one, navigating that particular specific grief with the same control he applied to everything. And she watched Enzo watching his son with the hunger of a man who had missed things and knew it, and was trying, in his late and difficult way, to bridge the distance. In the car afterward, she said, He loves you. Nero was quiet. In his way, which is complicated and conditional, and comes with a structure you've chosen not to inhabit, but it's real. Yes, he said, that's what makes it hard. She looked at him in the dark of the car and thought, there you are. There is the person under the armor, and he has been there all along, waiting for the right conditions to be seen. She developed the film herself, the way she always did for work she cared about. The chemical process, the gradual emergence in the developing tray, the image appearing the way truth sometimes appeared, slow and clear and irreversible. The photograph was the one she'd taken in the coffee shop in the North End 3 weeks ago. Nero at the window, his coffee in both hands, his face turned slightly away from her, the morning light coming in hard and golden from the left. She hadn't known when she took it that it was the best thing she'd shot in a year. She clipped it to the drying line and stood in the red light of the dark room, the closet she'd converted off the study, and looked at it. He was looking away from the camera, which meant she'd caught something he hadn't offered. The light on his jaw, the particular quality of his attention directed at something outside the frame. The stillness, which the photograph made visible in a way that was hard to articulate. You could see, in the set of his shoulders and the quality of his grip on the cup, a person who had learned to be very still as a survival mechanism, and in whose stillness there was both control and longing. She did not hear him come into the doorway. She became aware of him by the change in the air, the warmth and weight of his presence, and she turned. He was looking at the photograph on the drying line. You've been developing this whole time, he said. Hours. She'd lost track. Come see. He crossed the small space and stood beside her and looked at the photograph, and she watched his face in the red light. He was not a man who was used to being looked at. She'd understood that from the gallery photographs, from the way he occupied space. Not invisible, exactly, but deliberate about his visibility. He chose what he showed, and to whom, and how much. And the camera had bypassed that entirely, had found something he hadn't offered, and she wondered if he would mind. He didn't move for a long time. He started, and stopped. What? I look like someone who doesn't know what to do with quiet, he said. Someone who's waiting for the quiet to be taken away. She looked at the photograph again, through that description, and saw it. The held quality, the sense of a man experiencing peace with the vigilance of someone who knows it's temporary. That's exactly what I saw, she said quietly. He turned to look at her. The red light made everything intimate, made the small space feel even smaller. She was acutely aware of how close they were, the drying photographs brushing the air above them, the chemical smell, the heat of the dark room. The professional circumstances, he said. They're closed. She understood what he was saying. Marco's people have stood down. Your father's threat is resolved. He turned to face her fully. The terms of my arrangement with your father were for the duration of the threat. The threat is over, she said. Yes. So you're leaving. The word landed flat, and she heard it and didn't look away from it. That's what I should do, he held her gaze. That's what a professional would do. And I have been... He stopped, and she saw him actually struggle, which was something she hadn't seen before. The articulate precision he applied to everything, suddenly insufficient. I have been trying, he said, since approximately the second week, to remember that I was hired by your father, that you are a subject of protection, that that what I feel is not relevant to the job. It isn't the job anymore, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. Nero. She said his name the way she'd learned to say it, carefully, as something that mattered. I'm going to ask you something directly. You always do. Stay, she said. Not because of the job. Not as a bodyguard. Stay because... She stopped and chose her words with the care she used when she wrote what a photograph was trying to say. Because I think you are one of the most real people I've ever met, and I haven't finished seeing you yet. He was very still, the stillness that was not emptiness. My world, he said, my father's world, the things I carry. I know what you carry. She took one step toward him, which closed the last of the distance. I've been watching you carry it for weeks. I know the weight of it. She looked up at him. I'm a senator's daughter. I know what it means to be defined by a father's world. I've been doing it my whole life. A pause. We're not our fathers, Nero. Something broke open in his face. Just briefly, just enough. He raised his hand and touched her jaw, his thumb at the corner of her mouth. So gentle she wasn't certain at first that it was real. No, he said. We're not. He kissed her then, with the same quality that characterized everything about him. Controlled, precise, and underneath the control, extraordinary. She felt the full weight of what he'd been holding back. Weeks of it, the professional discipline, the carefully maintained distance, released into something that was not soft, but was entirely honest. She kissed him back, with both hands flat against his chest, and felt his heartbeat, faster than his face ever showed. He pulled back fractionally. His eyes were open. Stay, she said again. Yes, he said, and kissed her again, and the photographs moved in the warm air of the dark room, and outside Boston breathed its old criminal breath, and neither of them heard it. She woke first. She lay in the gray morning light of her bedroom, not the cold light of worry, but something different, something she identified after a moment as the light of someone who had slept well for the first time in weeks, and looked at him. He slept differently than he lived. The control relaxed in sleep. The vigilance gave way, and he was simply present. The sharp lines of his face were at rest, his breathing slow and even, one hand curled loosely at the edge of the pillow, as though even in sleep some part of him was ready. The scar on his jaw was silver in the morning light. She memorized it without reaching for her camera, because some things were for remembering and not for keeping. He opened his eyes at exactly the moment she thought this, which was its own kind of answer about the way he was wired, the alertness always there, just below the surface. He looked at her. His eyes were very clear in the morning. You were watching me, he said. Occupational habit. How long? A few minutes. She settled on her side. You sleep like someone who doesn't do it often. I don't. He turned onto his back, looking at the ceiling. It's a particular kind of vulnerability. Sleeping? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. In the field, in the kind of work I did, early on, you learn to sleep very lightly, to process sound while you're under. It becomes hard to turn off. The army? And after, his jaw moved. My father's household had its own requirements. She thought of the 18 months he'd described, learning the structure and then leaving it. The man whose hands were cut off. Do you dream? Sometimes. He glanced at her. What do you dream about? Light, usually. Compositions. Sometimes water. She paused. Sometimes I dream about being watched. His expression shifted. Since the notes began. Before, even. It's not always a frightening dream. Sometimes it's just being seen. Being observed. She looked at the ceiling. Being in the frame. You're behind the camera, he said, not in it. You'd be surprised, she said, how often photographers end up on the wrong side of what they're looking at. He turned his head to look at her with the full weight of his attention, which at close range in the morning light was a considerable thing. She held it. She'd been practicing, she realized. The weeks with him had been, among other things, practice for receiving that level of being looked at. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. My father called this morning, early, before you were awake. He paused. There's a remaining piece of the Gennaro situation. Not Marco, his branch has been managed. But there's an older member of the family, a man named Vito Gennaro, the patriarch, who was not part of Marco's agreement and who has, separately, expressed interest in your father's utility. He said it carefully. Vito is not Marco. He's more difficult. Difficult how? He has a longer memory and less patience for negotiation. Nero sat up. The sheet fell from his shoulders, and she watched him become, visibly, the person he was in daylight rather than in the dark, not closed exactly, but organized, arranged. My father wants to arrange a meeting, direct conversation between the Falcone house and Vito Gennaro, to make it absolutely clear that you and your father are not to be touched. And Enzo's position carries enough weight. In the Northeast, yes, absolutely. He looked at her. But it will require me to attend, as a Falcone. The distinction was clear and deliberate, not as your bodyguard, as his son. She sat up too. Is that difficult for you? It's necessary, he said, which wasn't the same as an answer. Nero, she touched his arm lightly. Is that difficult for you? He looked at her hand on his arm for a moment. Yes, he said, because every time I step back into that room, I'm aware that I chose to leave it. And choosing to leave and choosing to step back in are not. They don't cancel each other out. But you'll do it. I'll do it. He looked at her directly. Because the alternative is leaving you exposed, and that is not a thing I'm capable of. She held his gaze. I want to come. No. Nero. No. His voice was very clear. This is not a negotiation. This is not an access to information situation. This is a room full of men who would use your presence as leverage and your face as motivation. And I am not... He stopped, and she heard the thing he stopped himself from saying, and it was considerable. You are not coming to that meeting. She looked at him for a long moment. The force of his conviction was such that she understood immediately that this was not about control or condescension. This was about something very specific and very real that he knew and she didn't. And arguing against it would be the kind of stubbornness that confused independence with wisdom. All right, she said, but I want a full debrief. Everything. Everything, he agreed. She looked at him, the morning light, the scar, the hands she'd photographed and memorized, and felt the particular complication of caring about someone who moved in dangerous currents. The way loving a person who carries risk means becoming a person who accepts it. She thought of her mother, who had died when she was 10, who had loved a senator and understood what that required of her. She thought of Lucia Falcone, who had loved a man she couldn't stay with and raised her son alone. The things women learn to hold. Be careful, she said, which was inadequate and which was everything. Always, he said. The meeting was held at a private club in the financial district, the kind of establishment that had no sign outside and whose membership was by invitation only, and whose walls had absorbed, over decades, conversations that would have made headlines and destroyed careers. Nero arrived with 2 men from his father's household and his father himself, and he spent the car ride working through the specific discipline required to be Enzo Falcone's son, while also remaining the person who had decided not to be. Vito Gennaro was 81 years old and had the quality of very old trees in high wind, an impression of age and rootedness, of a kind of patience that had outlasted everything that had tried to rush it. He was accompanied by two of his sons and a lawyer named Pratt, who sat at the table's edge making notes in a small book. The room was paneled in dark wood. A fire burned. Scotch was poured. No one touched it. "The situation with my grandson has been managed," Vito said, without preamble. His voice was deep, slightly accented, Italian ground down into something almost patrician. "Marco is impulsive, always has been. His mother's blood." He looked at Nero with the particular measuring quality that Nero had encountered in this world many times. The calculation of another man's weight, his value, his liability. "You're the boy." "Enzo's son," Nero said. "Yes." "I've heard about you." Vito turned his glass. "The one who walked away." He said it without judgment. A man should know what he can and cannot live with. I respect the clarity. "The senator's family is not a target," Enzo said. His voice, across the table, was the voice Nero had heard in that apartment on Commercial Street, certain, unhurried, with the specific gravity of someone who had never needed to raise it. "This was my position when the original arrangement was made. The political situation, that's a business conversation. The daughter has nothing to do with any business." "The daughter," Vito said thoughtfully, looking at Nero, "appears to have acquired a personal significance." Nero said nothing. "Marco told me," Vito said. "He's observant, I'll give him that. He said the Falcone son had a look about him that suggested the girl was more than professional business." He turned the glass again. "That creates a complication." "It creates a clarity," Nero said. Vito's eyes moved to his face. "Oh? What I choose to do outside the parameters of a professional arrangement is my own business. What is relevant to you is that the Falcone house has a position on the senator's family, and that position has not changed and will not change. The outstanding debt has been resolved through a legitimate consulting arrangement. That closes the account." He paused. "If there are other outstanding matters between the Gennaro family and the Esposito political office, they are to be raised through the channel that's been established, not through threats, not through surveillance, not through Marco's interest in the senator's daughter." The silence that followed had a particular quality, the silence of a room in which someone has said something that has to be absorbed before it can be responded to. Vito Gennaro looked at him steadily, and then at Enzo, and then back at Nero. "You speak for the Falcone house," he said, "on this matter." "You walked away from the Falcone house." "I walked away from its operations," Nero said. "I didn't walk away from my name." Another silence. Enzo, across the table, was very still. Nero felt his father's presence the way he always had, like a current, something that moved beneath the surface and had its own direction. He had invoked the Falcone name deliberately, in this room, for the first time in 6 years, and he felt the weight of that decision in his chest. "All right," Vito said. "The senator's family is off the table." He leaned back. "This is not a concession. It is an acknowledgement that there are cleaner paths to what we want." He looked at Nero one more time. "The girl knows what you are?" "She knows who I am," Nero said, "which is not the same thing." Vito almost smiled. "Your father's eyes," he said, "but your mother's answer." The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. In the car back through the financial district, Enzo sat beside Nero and was quiet for 3 city blocks. "Then, you invoked the name. It was the right lever. You swore you never would. I said it was the right lever." Nero looked at his father. "I'm not interested in relitigating that decision. I'm interested in the fact that it worked." Enzo was quiet for another block. "She makes you different," he said. "I noticed it at dinner. You're less contained, in a way that is either very good or very dangerous." "Those tend to be the same thing," Nero said. Enzo looked at him, and what was in his eyes was something Nero had seen only a handful of times. Not the patriarch, not the authority, but the father. The man who had arrived in a hotel lobby when Nero was 20, and who had been navigating ever since the consequences of having been absent when presence mattered. "Be careful with it," Enzo said. "Care makes you vulnerable. Vulnerable men make mistakes." I know, Nero said, but don't be too careful, his father added after a moment. I was too careful once. I protected myself instead of the things worth protecting. He looked at the city through the window. I know what that cost. He told her everything. He sat across from her at the kitchen table in the penthouse that evening with 2 cups of coffee between them and walked her through the meeting in the financial district with the same precision he applied to security briefs: the room, the people, the words, the outcome. He did not edit. He did not protect her from the more difficult pieces. He told her about Vito's observation, that Marco had read something personal in Nero's manner at the Fairmont. He told her about invoking the Falcone name. He told her what his father had said in the car. She listened without interrupting, and when he was done, she was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. You invoked your name, she said. For me. For your safety. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She looked at him. 6 years of not claiming it, and you used it tonight. It was the effective tool. Nero. Her voice was very even and very clear. I'm not going to let you make that smaller than it is. You did something significant. I'm allowed to acknowledge that. He was quiet. Thank you, she said simply. He looked at her across the table. She was wearing a dark green sweater, and her hair was loose, and she looked... He had stopped cataloging what she looked like at some point in the last week, because it had become too continuous and too acute to manage. He was aware of her at all times with a specificity that had nothing to do with professional assessment and everything to do with the fact that he had never, in the 32 years of his life, been attached to someone with this quality of tether. It alarmed him and grounded him simultaneously. Your father called while you were in the meeting, she said. I know, I saw the missed call. He's grateful. The consulting arrangement. He says it's a genuine resolution. It gives the Gennaro family what they actually needed, which was economic access, without requiring him to compromise anything political. She paused. He also said he wants to meet with you. Not as a bodyguard, as himself, whatever that now is. Complicated. He knows who your father is, she said carefully. He's always known, and his gratitude for what you've done is, I think it's genuine, Nero. He's not a bad man. He's a man who made a bad arrangement and has been managing the consequences for 3 years. I know, he looked at her. I don't hold your father's choices against him. I hold... He stopped. What? I hold it against him that he brought you into it, he said. That he used you, even indirectly, even without intending to, as currency in a situation that was his to manage. That the notes and the photographs and the fear were the consequence of his deal, and they landed on you. She was quiet for a moment. He didn't choose that. No, but he created the conditions for it. He said it, not harshly, but with the precision of a man who has thought this through. You deserved better insulation from his world. I know, she met his eyes. But then I wouldn't have met you. He held her gaze. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Boston was doing what Boston did, living its double life, the surface and the underneath, the visible city and the one that ran on different rules. There's something I haven't said, he said. She waited. I came into this arrangement with an agenda. Your father's protection, yes. Using my father's name as a deterrent, that was part of it. But from very early, the professional motivation and the personal one, they became the same thing. He said it looking directly at her. I was protecting you because it was the job. And then I was protecting you because the thought of something happening to you was not something I could hold. She looked at him for a long time. How early? The first week, he said. The photographs you were developing in the darkroom. The way you talked to the painter at the gallery. The way you held that white card with the note on it and refused to look frightened even though you were. He paused. There was something in you I recognized. What? Someone who learned to be strong in conditions that didn't require strength and did it anyway. He held her gaze. Someone who made beauty out of what they were given. She was very still. Her eyes were very bright. I love you, he said. He said it the way he said everything important, without decoration, without prelude, as a flat statement of observed fact. That's what I haven't said. I love you. It started somewhere in the first 2 weeks, and it has been absolutely inconvenient ever since, and I thought you should know." She stood up from the table and crossed to him and took his face in both hands and kissed him. And his hands came up and held her by the waist with the care of a man handling something that matters. And the coffee went cold, and the city outside was dark and alive and indifferent, and neither of them needed it to be anything else. March arrived with the particular aggression of New England springs, still cold, but a cold that had committed to eventually becoming warm, the light-changing quality, lengthening, becoming something that suggested rather than confirmed. She had her show at the gallery on Newbury Street. 32 photographs, all from the new series. The harbor work, yes, but others too. The North End in winter, a cafe window with condensation on the glass, a man's hands wrapped around a coffee cup, the broken knuckle of the index finger clearly visible. That last one she debated hanging. She debated and then hung it anyway, in the center of the second room, because it was the best thing she'd made in 3 years, and withholding it would have been a kind of dishonesty she didn't permit herself. She was at the gallery at 6 in the morning on the day of the opening, finishing the hanging, and Nero was there with her, because Nero was always there with her, though the nature of his presence had changed, less post, more partner. He stood in front of the photograph for a long time when he first saw it in the gallery context, properly lit, the frame she'd chosen, the card beneath it. "What did you title it?" he asked. "The Weight of Care." She looked at the photograph over his shoulder. "Do you mind?" "No." He said it after a moment, with the considered quality he brought to true answers. "No, I don't mind." He turned to look at her. "It's honest. That's the only kind of photograph I know how to make." He kissed her temple and went back to what he'd been doing, which was reviewing the gallery's security arrangement with the same professional efficiency that had never fully left him. She watched him for a moment, the movement, the assessment, the way he organized a room in his mind, and thought, this is who he is. Not either/or, both, simultaneously. By 7 that evening, the gallery was full. Felix was there with his new series sketches, enthusiastic and champagne-laden. Her father was there with Margot, looking better than he had in months. The resolution of the Gennaro situation had lifted something from him, restored a quality of ease that the preceding years had taken away. The Globe photographer was there, and 3 collectors, and a critic from the Herald who would write a piece calling the Harbor series hauntingly precise and emotionally literate. And in the second room, in front of The Weight of Care, she found Enzo Falcone. She hadn't known he was coming. He was there with one of his men, dressed beautifully, his silver hair impeccable, looking at the photograph of his son's hands with an expression she had never expected to see on his face. He looked, she thought, like a father. Just that. Just a man looking at something made from the material of his child's life, understanding for the first time how someone else saw what he'd given the world. She stood beside him. "Mr. Falcone." "Enzo," he said, without looking away from the photograph. "He told me you were a photographer. He didn't tell me you were this." "I didn't know he was your subject when I made it." "No, but you saw him." He turned to look at her. Those dark eyes, so like Nero's, but open in a way Nero's were only becoming. "You saw him in a way I have not been permitted to." She thought of Lucia Falcone, raising her son alone in the North End, with the ghost of a man she'd chosen to leave. "He let me," she said simply. Enzo was quiet for a moment. "He is better with you," he said. "Not softer, better. There is a difference." "I know." He looked at the photograph once more. "I'd like to buy it." She shook her head gently. "It's not for sale." He almost smiled, a real one, brief and warm. "No," he said. "I didn't imagine it would be." He moved on. She stayed in front of the photograph and felt, in the particular way her best work sometimes made her feel, the completeness of a thing. That the long exposure and the chemical patience and the choice of what to see had produced something that was not just about the subject, but about the act of seeing itself. Nero found her there 10 minutes later. He came to stand beside her. "He was here," she said. "I know. I saw him. He wanted to buy it." A small sound, not quite a laugh, but adjacent. "What did you say?" "That it wasn't for sale." She looked at him. "It isn't. It's mine." He looked at the photograph. "The knuckle," he said. "I told you I was paying attention." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The show is extraordinary, Fiora." He said it with the specific weight of someone whose praise was rare enough to be meaningful. "Everything in here, the harbor work, the cafe, the North End, it's—" He paused, and she saw him genuinely trying to find the right word. "It makes me feel like you've been somewhere I haven't been, and I want to go there." She took his hand. "You are there," she said. "That's what I've been trying to show you." He looked at her, and in the gallery light with the photographs around them and Boston in the windows, she saw the thing she'd first seen in those photographs she'd taken in secret. The stillness that was not emptiness, the controlled exterior, and the real person moving in the depth of it, becoming, slowly, visible. She was on her way to the library, the Boston Public Library, Copley Square, where she was speaking to a photography student program, when the car was cut off. Not dramatically, not with screeching tires or Hollywood choreography. A black SUV slid into their lane with the calm confidence of someone who knew the traffic would part, and when Nero braked cleanly and smoothly and reached for his phone, a second car appeared in the rearview mirror. "Stay calm," he said. "I'm very calm." Her voice was steady, which was not how she felt. "We're going to turn right at the next block and—" The lead car stopped. 3 men got out. They stood in the street in the way that people stand when they want you to understand that the street is theirs. The middle one was someone she hadn't seen before, tall, gray-suited, with a face that had the particular weathered quality of someone who had spent decades in difficult rooms. "Who is that?" she said. Nero was very still. His hands were on the wheel. His phone was already to his ear, but he was looking at the man in the gray suit with a quality of recognition that was complicated. "His name is Caruso," he said. "He works for someone my father has been in conflict with, someone outside the Gennaro arrangement." "A different family?" "A different city," his voice was controlled. "Stay in the car, lock the door when I get out, call my father, his number is first in my contacts." He looked at her directly. "Do not get out of this car, regardless of what you see." "Nero, do you understand me?" She held his gaze for 1 second. "Yes." He got out. She locked the doors and called the number and watched through the windshield as he crossed the distance between the car and the 3 men with the particular quality of movement she'd seen in him from the beginning. Unhurried, very aware, the movements of someone who has calculated the geometry of a situation before a single word has been spoken. The call connected on the second ring. Enzo's voice was calm, already knew something. "There are 3 men on—" She checked the street sign. "Dartmouth Street. A man called Caruso." A pause. "Is Nero with them now?" "Yes." She heard the quality of Enzo's attention shift. "I'm calling now. Keep the line open." His voice, briefly away from the phone, issuing instructions in Italian. Then back. "How does he look?" She watched Nero. He was standing perhaps 8 feet from Caruso now, speaking. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read his body. The controlled stillness, the hands open at his sides, which she'd learned was a specific posture, a signal. Ready but not threatening, calm but entirely capable. "He looks," she said, "like he's in complete control of a situation that isn't controlled." A sound from Enzo that was brief and might have been pride. "Yes," he said, "he always has." The conversation between Nero and Caruso lasted 4 minutes by her phone screen. At one point, Caruso looked past Nero to the car, to her, with an expression she couldn't fully read from a distance. Nero stepped fractionally left, putting himself more squarely in the sightline, and Caruso's gaze moved back. Then, the 3 men returned to the SUV. The lead car pulled away. The tail car followed. The street reorganized itself around the gap they'd left, the ordinary traffic of Dartmouth Street flowing back like water. Nero came back to the car. She unlocked the doors. He got in and sat for a moment without speaking, his hands on the wheel, his breathing controlled. "What was that?" she said. "A message." He looked at her. "From a man named Donato in New York. He has an interest in the seaport development that your father's failed deal was part of, an older interest, pre-Marchetti. He wanted to make it clear that he hasn't forgotten." "And what did you say?" I said that the Falcone house had resolved the Boston matters and that any outstanding considerations regarding the seaport development were between him and the relevant parties, not Senator Esposito's family. He paused. I also said that the senator's family now had the Falcone name behind it, and that any action against them would be treated as an action against the house. She looked at him. You keep doing that, invoking your father's name. It's effective. It's also... She stopped. What? It's also not something you walk back from, she said carefully. Once you've claimed it publicly, in these rooms, you can't unclaim it, can you? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said, you can't. She held his gaze. Is that something you made peace with? He looked at her for a long time. I made peace with it, he said, when I understood that the alternative was leaving you unprotected. He started the car, and that is not a thing I'm capable of. She looked at his profile as he drove, the scar, the jaw, the careful hands on the wheel, and felt the complicated arithmetic of loving someone whose world had costs. The Falcone name was a shield and a weight and a door that, once opened, changed the architecture of who you were. He had opened it, for her, and he had done it with full knowledge. She thought of something Enzo had said at dinner. She is worth the complications. She thought, I intend to be. Spring came properly in April, real warmth at last, the kind that arrived without apology and transformed the harbor. She photographed it obsessively, the way she always photographed a change in light, as though documenting evidence before it could be taken back. Her father won his re-election bid. The announcement came on a Tuesday evening with the particular relief of a man who had not been certain and was now allowed to be. She watched it on television with Nero beside her on the penthouse sofa, her father's face on the screen in the moment of learning, the quick, contained joy of a politician who had spent years managing his expressions, and felt a complicated affection for him, the kind that lived alongside grievance. Are you happy for him? Nero said. Yes, she thought about it. He's a good senator, even when he's a complicated father. The work matters. I don't want to conflate those things. That's generous. It's accurate. She looked at him. Does it feel like an ending? The threat resolved, the election over, the reason for the arrangement? He turned to look at her. You're asking if I'm going to leave. I'm asking how you see the geography. He was quiet for a moment. I see it as a beginning, he said. The arrangement ended months ago. What's between us is not an arrangement. He paused. I want to be clear about that. You're very clear, she said. You're almost excessively clear. I'm working on nuance. She laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised her, and he looked at her when she laughed, with that particular expression that she'd been watching accumulate since February. Something open and specific and very warm, the face of a man who is becoming accustomed to joy with the careful gratitude of someone who has not always had access to it. They had been navigating his world, in the weeks since the gallery show, with the particular honesty that both of them required. He had made clear to her the extent of his connection to the Falcone structure, the name he'd reclaimed, the meetings he attended now at Enzo's request, the specific shape of what he had agreed to be and what he refused to be. Not in the organization, not involved in its operations, but present as a son, as a Falcone in the ways that didn't require him to become someone else. She had made clear to him the extent of her father's world, the politics, the obligations, the life of a senator's daughter who had always existed in the careful space between her own life and her father's. She had shown him, obliquely, that she knew what it was to be defined by someone else's power and to carve out your own truth inside it. They understood each other's histories. This was not a small thing. I want to show you something, she said. She went to the darkroom and came back with a box, archival, flat, the kind she used for work she was keeping. She set it on the coffee table and opened it. Inside, 43 photographs, all of him. The series she'd been assembling since October. The cafe, the gallery, the kitchen light, the harbor. Him watching, him driving, him in the doorway of the darkroom, him at the meeting table in her father's study 3 weeks ago, when they'd briefed her father together on the Caruso situation. Him asleep, one morning in January, when the light through the bedroom curtains had been so precise and so rare that she'd reached for her phone without waking him. He looked through them slowly, taking his time with each one. She watched him, the assembly of himself, seen through her eyes, accumulated over months. He looked up at the sleeping photograph. "You're not supposed to photograph people when they're asleep," she said. "It's considered unethical." "Is it?" But the light was... I couldn't not. He looked at it for a long time. In the photograph, he was turned slightly away, the sheet at his waist, and the early light was on the curve of his shoulder and the back of his neck, and he looked, she thought, like someone who had finally trusted the quiet enough to sleep in it completely. "What are you going to do with these?" he said. "Keep them," she paused. "And eventually, not now, not for a while, a show. A private series. Not the gallery, something smaller." She looked at him. "If you consent to it." He looked up. "Why not now?" "Because I haven't finished yet." She looked at the photograph spread between them. "You're not done becoming yourself. I want to keep watching." He was very still. "Is that too much?" she said. "No." He said it quietly. No." He reached across the photographs and touched her face with the careful precision of someone who understood the fragility of things worth having. "That is exactly right." She leaned into his hand. Outside, April Boston was doing something with the light that she would photograph tomorrow, the harbor going silver in the evening, the city settling into its double life, the old criminal breath rising into the spring air and dissipating, for once, into something that was almost clean. The phone call came in May, from a number she didn't know. She answered it because she answered most calls she didn't know. Her father's world had trained her to expect contact from unexpected directions, and the voice on the other end was female. Older, Italian-inflected. "Miss Esposito," the woman said, "my name is Helena Caruso. My husband is the man who stopped your car on Dartmouth Street in March." Fiora sat down. "I'm calling because I want to warn you," Helena Caruso said. Her voice was careful, the voice of a woman who had thought very precisely about this call before making it. "My husband is not finished. The resolution your bodyguard imposed on that situation was... It didn't hold, on our end. My husband's employer in New York has made a new decision. He is coming to Boston himself." "Donato." A pause. "Yes." "When?" "Within the month." A brief silence. "My husband told me about the young man who got out of your car. Who he was. Who his father is." Another pause. "I know what the Falcone's name means. But Donato is not afraid of the Falcone name. He's been in conflict with Enzo Falcone for years. This, your young man's protection, it may create an escalation rather than a deterrent." Fiora's hand was very steady on the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" A long silence. "Because I am tired," Helena Caruso said, "of what this world does to women who love the wrong men." A pause. "You seem like someone who should be warned." The call ended. She sat with it for 5 minutes, and then she went and found Nero in the second bedroom, his command post, his books and his laptop and his careful notes, and she told him. Everything. Verbatim. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Donato in Boston," he said. She said within the month. He stood, went to his desk, made a call that lasted 4 minutes and produced, on the other end, the sound of Enzo Falcone receiving information that he had apparently already been tracking the outline of. When he hung up, he said, "My father knows about Donato. He's been monitoring the New York situation since Dartmouth Street." He turned to look at her. "This is not a situation we're surprised by, but the timing is..." He stopped. "What?" "Accelerated." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to go to Washington." "No." "Fiora." "No, we've been through this. I'm not removing you from danger," he said. "I'm giving myself the ability to act without worrying about your immediate safety. There is a difference." His voice was even, but she could see what was underneath it, the precise shape of the fear that he managed with such extraordinary control. "If you're in Washington with your father and a security detail, a real one, federal level, I can deal with Donato without dividing my attention." She looked at him. "You're afraid," she said, "not of Donato, of making a mistake because of me." "Yes," he said it without shame. "I don't make mistakes. It is the one thing I have always been certain of. But with you in the room, I am..." A pause. "Not entirely myself. I am someone who cares too much about one specific outcome." She stood up and crossed to him. He was tense in a way she could feel from 3 feet away, the controlled tension of a man who had calculated every variable and found the one he couldn't control. "I'll go to Washington," she said. 3 days. If the situation isn't resolved in 3 days, I'm coming back, and you will tell my father's security team to expect me and not to interfere." He looked at her for a long moment. 3 days, he agreed. "Tell me what you're planning to do." "Convince my father to arrange a direct meeting with Donato in New York, on neutral ground, with the full weight of the Falcone structure behind it." He said it clearly. Not a message, not a proxy. Enzo and I in the same room with a position that is unambiguous. You'll be in the same room as Donato." "Yes. That's dangerous." "Managed dangerous." He looked at her directly. "I know what I'm doing, Fiora. He paused. "This is what I know how to do, if you'll let me do it." She held his face in her hands. She had learned his face in the months since October, all of it. The scar and the controlled expression and the rare warmth and the deep, absolute attention of those dark eyes. She had learned it the way you learn a landscape you intend to return to repeatedly. "Come back," she said. It was not a request. It was a fact she was declaring in advance. "That is not negotiable," he said. She went to Washington. She sat in her father's office on the hill and photographed the reflecting pool in the gray May light and answered her father's questions about Nero with the particular care of someone discussing something they are still in the process of understanding. She checked her phone every hour. She slept badly in the guest room of the townhouse on Inn Street and dreamed of water and light. On the second day, Nero called. "It's done," he said. She exhaled for the first time in 48 hours. What happened? Donato accepted the terms. The Falcone and Gennaro houses presented a unified position, a single, clear line. Any action against the Esposito family is an action against both houses. He backed down. A pause. He's a practical man. He didn't come to Boston to start a war. "And you and Enzo?" A brief silence. "We were effective together." She heard something in his voice that she hadn't heard before, something settled. "I think," he paused, "I think it was the first time I've felt like his son, rather than someone he wished was his son." She felt the weight of that. "Good," she said softly. "That's good, Nero." "Come home," he said. "I'm already packing," she said. June came in gold. Boston in June was a city that had survived itself, the winter, the gray, the long battle of New England's spring, and emerged into warmth that felt earned rather than given. The harbor was blue, genuinely blue, not the winter gray she'd spent months photographing. The North End smelled of bread and sea air and the particular sweetness of old cities in warm weather. She was on the roof of the penthouse when he found her. She'd discovered the roof access 3 weeks ago and had been going up in the early morning for the light, which was extraordinary, the whole city below and east to the harbor and the boats moving in the gold morning air. She heard the door, heard his step, didn't turn. He sat beside her on the low wall with his coffee and looked at what she was photographing, the harbor, the light, a ferry making its slow crossing, the brilliant specificity of a June morning. "Carmela wants to know if you're coming on Sunday," he said. "Tell her yes." She lowered the camera. "Tell her I'll bring that wine she wanted from the shop on Salem Street." She'll pretend she can't remember asking for it and then immediately open it. "I know. That's what I like about her." She looked at him. He was in his oldest clothes, worn dark trousers, a plain white shirt, his hair slightly less organized than usual, the version of him that existed on mornings when there was no professional requirement to be otherwise. She loved this version particularly. "Tell me something you haven't told me." He considered. "When I was 17, I worked 3 months at a fish market on the waterfront. 4 in the morning until noon. I smelled of fish for the entire summer and never told anyone where I was working." She laughed. "Why?" "Pride." He smiled, a real one, the kind that had been becoming more frequent over months. "I was going to save enough money to move out of my cousin's apartment, and I didn't want anyone to know until I had." A pause. "I moved out in October, told everyone I'd been doing odd jobs. The fish remained a secret. Until now." Until now. He looked at the harbor. Your turn. I applied to an MFA program when I was 22 and didn't tell anyone. Got accepted. Didn't go. She met his eyes. I was afraid that having the credential would change the work, that it would make it formal, official, that I'd become a photographer of the institutional kind rather than the kind I am. Was that the real reason? She thought about it. Partly. Partly I was afraid that going would mean leaving my father's world, and I didn't know yet what I was instead of a senator's daughter. She paused. I know now. What are you? Someone who sees things, she said, who makes pictures out of what she sees, who fell in love with a man from the North End whose father is a complicated patriarch and whose knuckle has been broken at a slightly wrong angle, and who said I love you in a kitchen in November with the same tone he uses for security briefs. She looked at him steadily. That's who I am. He was looking at her with that expression she'd stopped trying to name and started trying to simply receive, the full weight of his attention, all of it. She was no longer intimidated by it. She had learned to hold it the way you learn to hold very strong light, not by looking away, but by letting your eyes adjust. I've been thinking, he said, about the practical shape of things. The practical shape. Where we are, where this goes. He set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. My father wants me to formalize something in his structure. A role, not operational, advisory, legal entirely. It would mean being a Falcone in a defined way, taking a name I've been carrying informally and making it specific. He held her gaze. It would change things. For us? For my life, yes. My position in this city, the rooms I'm admitted to, the responsibilities. He paused. And it would mean, formally, that you are with someone who carries that name. She looked at him for a long time. Is this you warning me? It's me making sure you understand what you're choosing. Nero, she took his hand. I have been choosing, with full information, for months. I know what your name means. I know what your father's world is. I know the costs. She looked at their hands, his with the broken knuckle she had photographed and loved and memorized. I'm not afraid of complicated. No, he said, you never have been. What I am, she said, is afraid of loss, of the thing that happened on Dartmouth Street happening again, but differently. Of whatever room you walk into being the one you don't walk back out of. She looked up at him. That's the thing I need you to keep working on. Coming back. Always coming back, she said. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to the back of it, a gesture so old-fashioned and so entirely his that she felt it move through her completely. His eyes, above their joined hands, were the dark color of deep water, of strong coffee, of every winter harbor photograph she'd ever made. Always, he said. They sat on the roof and watched the harbor move in the June light. The city below them was its own complexity, the visible city and the one beneath it, the law and the thing that ran on different laws, the surface of things and their actual structure. She had been photographing that gap for years, the place between what appeared and what was, without having a name for it. She had a better name for it now. She raised her camera. She didn't photograph him, not this time. She photographed the harbor, the light on the water, the long gold morning of a Boston June, the ferry moving in the distance like something purposeful and slow. She felt his hand on her back, his presence, solid and warm and real. In the kitchen of the penthouse 3 hours later, she was developing the morning's shots, working quickly, the chemical smell she'd come to associate with clarity, the images emerging in the developing tray one by one, when he appeared in the doorway the way he'd appeared the very first time. Watching. The light on his face the color of patience. She looked up at him in the red light. The harbor shots are going to be extraordinary, she said. Show me when they're dry, he said. Always, she said, and heard the word she'd chosen, and saw him hear it too. She went back to the photographs. He remained in the doorway. Outside, Boston moved through its ordinary, extraordinary day, the bread and the salt and the old criminal breath rising into the gold June air. The two cities, always, the surface and the depth. She photographed them both. She had learned, finally, that this was the job, not to choose one layer over the other, not to pretend the danger away or romanticize it into something it wasn't, but to look at all of it, the light and the dark, the beautiful and the dangerous, the cost and the value, and make something honest from what she saw. To keep looking, to keep choosing, to come back. Always. There is a photograph hanging in a small gallery in the South End, not Newbury Street, not the institutional kind, but a narrow room on Tremont with exposed brick and good light. The show is listed simply as Private Series, 2024 to 2025, and the photographer's name is Fiora Esposito Falcone. The photograph in question is 30 inches by 20, silver gelatin print. A man's profile in early morning light, turned slightly away from the camera, a coffee cup in both hands, a scar along the jaw, silver and old, the knuckle of the right index finger, broken at an angle, healed perfectly wrong. The title card beneath it reads, The Weight of Care. Beside it, a smaller print, 2 figures in a dark room, red lit, very close. Neither is looking at the camera. They are looking at each other, and the photographer's own hand is visible at the frame's edge, extended, reaching. The card beneath reads, Being Seen. The show runs through August. It sells out on the first night. Not the photographs. Those are not for sale. The catalog. For anyone who ever learned that love is not a safe place, only a true one.